Welcome to the JCPS MTSS Formative Assessment Toolkit training on the How You'll Practice of Feedback. I'm Amy Downs, MTSS Engagement Resource Teacher with Zone 2.
I'm Bo Burkett, MTSS Engagement Resource Teacher for high schools.
Please take a moment to type the case-sensitive bit.ly into your web browser. This will allow you access to all the links for the activities and resources offered throughout the presentation. Here you will see the 6 components that make up the MTSS department or multi-tiered systems of support. MTSS focuses on overall school improvement by aligning resources and support for both teachers and students. We provide multiple levels of support for learners that address academic, social, emotional, and behavioral needs, and produce professional development that is aligned with schools and the district as a whole. Let me start with showing you the components of our department. Multi-tiered systems of support is known as MTSS. This concept map shows a visual of the departments within MTSS. The MTSS academic department provides teachers with Tier 2 and Tier 3 intervention and academic support. This department is headed by Donna Lawson. The MTSS Behavior Department, which is led by Sandra Hensel, supports schools in implementing school-wide behavior systems and frameworks, including PBIS and restorative practices. The MTSS Re-Engagement Department supports students who are transitioning back to their home schools from Minor Daniels Academy and Breckenridge Metropolitan. The goal of our department, the MTSS Engagement Department, is to increase student achievement by equipping teachers with high-yield pedagogical practices to maximize student engagement. Both the MTSS Engagement and the Re-Engagement Departments are led by Dr. Naomi Brahim. The point of contact for each department is located within the concept map. Here are our 6 MTSS toolkits. By clicking the toolkit image, you will be able to access the MTSS department website and each toolkit. Our MTSS Formative Assessment Toolkit acknowledges that successful implementation of this high-yield practice, or as you'll often hear it referred to as an HYP, is reached when the teacher is able to strengthen student achievement through a continual feedback loop that requires student-teacher collaboration. Upon completing this training, we will examine the components of an effective student-teacher feedback loop for formative assessment purposes. Depending on whether you've already used the feedback loop or not, your success criteria is either I will incorporate or I will evaluate and adjust my use of the feedback loop while formatively assessing my students. Before we dive into understanding the feedback loop, it's important to have an understanding of what formative assessment is and its role in student achievement. Summative assessments are the end of the road. Grades or scores are assigned once student work has been evaluated. However, formative assessments are used to guide teachers and students towards future learning. These are the stops along the way to ensure that the final grade, or more importantly, student learning and understanding, are to the highest points possible. So formative assessments are crucial. Formative assessment can be defined as the ongoing process that both teachers and students engage in when they focus on using their current learning goals as an informal assessment process. It's when teachers adjust their instruction based on what could be a variety of products, which today we are going to discuss feedback, and then in turn, students adjust their learning practice as they move closer to their goals. With this HYP, we will mostly focus on that last bullet, taking action. And we will be taking action through feedback. Feedback refers to a teacher's indication to a student whether a behavior, skill, action was demonstrated correctly. A crucial point is, and we will discuss this more, feedback, at least quality feedback, should cause thinking, reflection, and action. The key is in both the frequency and ratio of positive to negative feedback, no matter the content of it. Now, thinking about the feedback definition that we just reviewed, look at this photo. We are taking that definition and adding formative with it, which we explored the meaning of prior to. That addition expands the purpose slightly. And this photo is a really good way to represent it. True formative assessment starts with where students currently are. Keeping the desired goal in mind, our feedback should be just what they need to help them close the gap, or in this case, get to the other side successfully. We don't build the bridge for them or tell them to turn around and leave. We help them get to where they need to be. I'm going to read you this quote by John Hattie real quickly. Seeing feedback as a teaching opportunity can help shift the teaching perspective from correction to collaboration, from merely fixing students' work to moving students forward in their learning. We're going to pause very briefly to give you some time, and you can write down or think about feedback that you provide to your students. Thinking about what we have covered thus far, as well as what Dr. Hattie is saying here in this quote, does your feedback correct or build collaboration? Is it meant to fix or move learning forward? Keep this in mind as we move through this training. We're going to give you a moment to reflect, but if you need more time, feel free to pause the video. And then Bo is going to introduce the feedback loop.
An important part of formative assessment is the feedback loop. We will learn more about this topic in the following slides, but it is important to note that successfully implementing this strategy relies on teacher and student having shared understanding of learning intentions and success criteria. As you notice, feedback is not just given on specific assignments or an assessment, but also on student progress and the process of learning. Student roles and benefits. Keep in mind, students must be taught to self-monitor, reflect on the learning process, and analyze evidence of their thinking and understanding. There are several benefits to students developing these skills. If they are able to do this successfully, they will have the tools necessary to take control of their learning, actively monitor their performance, and reduce uncertainty. All of this helps to increase motivation. Teacher roles and benefits. Some roles that teachers play in the feedback loop are as follows. Teachers must adjust their instructional strategy based on evidence. Teachers must collect and analyze evidence of student understanding, and teachers must analyze evidence of thinking and understanding. Doing this makes learning barriers visible to the teacher, provides evidence of students' current level of performance, and allows students, allows the teacher to adjust their level of instruction to fit with the student's current level of understanding. Keep in mind that teachers don't always have to initiate feedback. And if they do, the success of that feedback is determined largely by how the teacher responds. If the teacher does initiate the feedback, the initial interaction is going to most likely determine the success of that single interaction. Bringing everything together from the last two slides, you can see where formative assessment can take place within the feedback loop. In order for the feedback loop to be effective, continuous communication from student to teacher and teacher to student is critical. Further evidence that the feedback loop is a key component for formative assessment purposes is that it connects with research-based characteristics of effective feedback. Effective feedback is goal-directed and connects to the learning intentions, understandable, and connects to success criteria and/or the rubric, timely, and provides for opportunity to act or self-adjust, specific, and elaborates on what was done well and on what next focus should be, and collaborative, and allows for dialogue from teacher to student, student to teacher, and student to student. This is a video of middle school teacher Mr. Clyde, who incorporates and utilizes multiple types of feedback and for formative assessment purposes. As you watch the following video, try to jot down all of the components in the lesson where feedback is given by teachers or students. For example, you will see that the first part of feedback came from pre-assessments, where students provide the teacher with feedback.
We added up at the end.
So then you have, went from 2 to 2.5. Did you do a third one? We're going to do it. What you do is you add them, and then you divide by 2.
By 2?
3, because there's 3 trials. So formative assessment is an assessment where the teacher uses the information to modify their instruction. So it's not an assessment that's the end-all, be-all of what students know, but information on which the teacher is going to use to adapt their instruction.
So today we are starting Unit 2, and with Unit 2, with the start of any unit, okay, we have to do the pretest to see what it is you're knowing. Actually, unlike Unit 1, where I got a lot of the results and a lot of people didn't know much about it, this one I am seeing some things that people are able, that they kind of know or are able to do. So it's going to help with determining what I'm going to do in the future lessons. So remember, part of a pretest is it shows me what you know, what you don't know, and what I need to do as a teacher to plan ahead. To start off the unit, I had the students take a pre-assessment. And the purpose of the pre-assessment was to show me what the students were already capable of before starting the unit. Okay, so what I found from the pre-assessment was that the students had the skill of actually identifying a statement that interpreted the graph correctly. So this told me that I wasn't going to have to spend as much time actually teaching the students how to interpret a graph. In the next lesson, I used Nearpod to make sure the students understood how to interpret graphs and construct a graph. I like using Nearpod because it allows me to get information about the student's level of understanding immediately. But once I saw that information come in, I was able to see, okay, yeah, they are understanding how to interpret the graph, or they're struggling, so let me spend a little bit more time, do another practice problem. And then I could share exemplary examples, like, here's a good one. This is one I like, and so the students then try to model that approach. Look at your iPads. I'm going to show you an exemplary response. This one's a good one here. So this one right here says, the relationship in the data shows, using that good sentence stem, that when the distance, meters, from the basket increases, the number of shots made decreases. That's what we saw, right? As the person goes farther and farther away from the basket, they're not as accurate, right? They can't make as many baskets. Start on the front side, construct the graph, given the data, and interpret it. You may begin.
From the pre-assessment again, I saw that I wasn't going to have to spend as much time building up to the performance task, because the performance task, they were going to have to construct a graph and interpret it. At first I thought I was going to have to spend about 2 to 3 days just making sure they know how to plot a point, making sure that they knew how to read a graph, and I wasn't going to have to spend as much time on that. So I was able to jump to the performance task a lot faster. So I try to be as timely as I can when it comes to assessments, performance tasks, because the students need to know if they're doing well or not. And so it's so important to provide that timely feedback to the students, and that they have the opportunity to actually look at their data and figure out, okay, what do I need to do to get better? At the bottom, I want you to write down these 2 questions. What did I do well? And how can I get better? So when the students got back the performance tasks, they had an opportunity to analyze the results. And so I had them answer 2 questions. They reflected on what they did well and what they need to do to get better. So that provides them the opportunity to see, okay, what is it that I'm doing right? What is it that I need to do in order to improve my grade? Or if I am doing well, how do I make sure to sustain this? And so that's so important for the student to do that, because the student is not going to improve unless they have an opportunity to reflect on what they need to do to get better. So different ways of providing students feedback in the formative assessment process would be You can have the teacher providing the student feedback or the student providing the teacher some feedback. It could be students providing each other feedback, and that could be as simple as having the students discuss their answers and share their thoughts.
Okay, so the question to this is describe the relationship in the data, and it's telling about this girl Sheila's running record, and by the way it looks like her running record is it increases more because of the distance because she runs better. So
488
yeah,
meters.
yeah. And
So
then,
by each meter, the time increases.
yeah,
So I knew I wanted to have a lab after the performance tasks, and I knew that I wanted the lab to reflect kinetic energy in some way. I wasn't sure exactly what it was going to look like because I wasn't sure how the students were going to be performing throughout the week. So I wasn't sure if it was going to have to be very basic, like, okay, we're just practicing graphing still, maybe some type of lab in that respect, or can I really start including a lot of the concepts? But based off of what I saw with the performance tests, overall the students were capable of interpreting a graph. They were able to construct a graph. So I said, okay, well now let's go ahead and add an extra piece. They can collect the data. They could still have that practice of then plotting that data and constructing the graph and then interpret it. So it kind of allowed those students who were still needed more practice, the opportunity to practice, and those students who were ready to kind of, okay, let's start applying this to a real situation, that opportunity. I think formative assessments are the most important because without formative assessments, students won't be successful on a summative. So if I see a student is not performing well, I have to use that opportunity or find an opportunity to make sure that the students can be successful in it. Or if a student knows they're not doing well, that they have an opportunity to make sure that they get better.
So where in the video did formative assessment take place? During the pre-assessment, students provided the teacher with feedback about what they already knew. During the lesson, the students provided the teacher with feedback so that the teacher was able to determine how deep they understood the content. In return, the teacher shared an exemplary. Students also provided the teacher with feedback during performance tasks, which is something the teacher was able to give specific feedback on. The teacher provided students feedback during graded tasks and set them up for success by giving them guidance on their next steps. Students were able to self-assess and provide themselves with feedback to gain an understanding of where they are in the learning process. And finally, students were able to share with others, which allowed them to provide feedback to their peers. Notice again, feedback not only flowed from teacher to student, but also student to teacher.
Okay, now that we've been given all this info, when can and should you really incorporate the formative feedback loop within your instruction? We're going to read through these, but I want you to remember that you have access to the slideshow. The bit.ly is on the first slide. Linked to the header on this slide and the following slide is a more in-depth explanation into the content of these two slides. You just click it and it'll take you to a Google Doc that has more in-depth explanation. As we read through this, you'll notice some of the examples that we saw from Mr. Cloud in the video. So you can use formative feedback to check the status of learners' knowledge, to encourage learners to analyze the mistakes themselves, to give non-evaluative input, and also to make observations. Here's some planning tips. Again, right here, you just hover over and click it, and that'll take you back to that Google Doc. When providing feedback, You want to remember that the purpose is to initiate new thinking and remove uncertainties or clarify objectives. You want to plan for multiple points of formative feedback, both from the teacher and student. You want to differentiate your formative feedback. You want to explore the potential of multiple modes of feedback, and that would include written, verbal, graphic, video, and electronic means. And you want to plan for formative feedback opportunities. And we're going to give you some engaging formative feedback resources that you may want to try on the next slide. So this slide is just a resource for you when you're wanting to explore different ways to incorporate this HYP. The first two bullets we saw in the video from Mr. Clyde. Then we have links and Kagan structures. When you access these, you're going to notice that they are mostly written as student-to-student strategies, which we absolutely recommend that you plan for. However, for the feedback loop process, you just want to switch the role of one of the students to you, the teacher, so that you're engaged in it. And then to make this more successful and long-term, you want to continuously share and discuss this within your PLCs. And yes, formative feedback is definitely a component of the full PLC cycle if it is implemented correctly. If we're focusing on the 4 critical questions in PLCs, you'll see that formative feedback is a definite way to get to what the answers we need are from questions 2 and 3, which are, how do we know if students have learned, and how do we respond when students don't learn?
Culturally responsive considerations. Employ, accept multiple approaches when teaching. Assess using options, personalization, and choice. Include learning goals and learning logs to document progress, peer review, and frequent feedback. Use meaningful and frequent assessments, including alternative forms, to inform instruction, support student learning, and assist in monitoring their learning. Consider using a problem-solving approach where questions are formulated and students are engaged in solving. Exceptional child education considerations. Use the principles of universal design for learning, UDL, when planning instruction to identify barriers that may prevent a student from demonstrating understanding. Have students set learning goals and monitor their own progress towards those goals. Provide explicit and specific feedback. Question throughout the lesson to understand student processing of information. Collect formative assessment data frequently and at varied intervals to inform instruction. Deeper learning considerations. Start with the end in mind. Decide a final product and determine knowledge and skills needed. Build a rubric and break project into benchmarks with assessments for each. Use a variety of assessment modes, not always formal, including self-assessment, and include focus on critical thinking and problem solving. Utilize cooperative learning for peer assessment and feedback, student-teacher conferences for assessment and feedback, and student-led conferences for students to direct their own learning. After you've tried it out, come back to this list and reflect on the following questions. Remember to discuss these within your PLC and continue to incorporate them throughout your instruction. If you want to learn more about formative assessment and feedback, please access the following resources. And for more information about the MTSS toolkits and other high yield practices, please visit our website by clicking the link below.